We will bring the design subcommittee of the Concord Middle School Building Committee to order, a virtual meeting, April 15th, 2020, 2:31 in the afternoon, being administered by Chris Carmody out of town government. Chris, are we being recorded?
You are. Yes.
Yes, so, and I will note that we are being recorded. We're not going to take citizen comments, but we have invited citizen comments to come in to the building committee at large before and after the meeting. We regret that's necessary in this virtual admin world that we're doing. We will be fully compliant with open meeting law as we continue. Our purpose today is to continue the review of the design concept options, to look at updates, to then review in some kind of priority order that we'll work on the design related questions and recommendations that have come forth at the March 26th full building committee meeting and after that date, so that we are in a position to better inform the building committee next Thursday, April 23, when it convenes. By way of process, I will ask Lori and Kristen, you both, I think, can help lead some of the overview conversation to bring us up to speed on where we stand in terms of work that you've done with school leadership, Lori, with the design team around these concepts, and which ones seem to support philosophy and the kind of pedagogy that you want, as well as the efficiencies we're seeking, and then how that intersects with Kristen, your work on behalf of the design team and everybody involved there. I'd ask the two of you, who's the best to lead off on that?
I'm certainly happy to kick it off. I think it's a collective effort with Justin and the designers who were part of it. Matt was certainly, instrumental in that discussion, as was Phil, but Saul, Keith, all of you were there. So really what we did was to just try to go back and look at the 4 concepts that we've all been looking at, and just have another round of educational lens to them. So that's the time we took last week, and what it proved to be was really just a thorough reflection on what's in those designs and the pros and cons. We ended up leaning slightly towards certain features more than others, which we thought was, I think, the outcomes we were striving for, not necessarily to get to, this one recommendation to come back to the committee with, more to just feel like we were further informed and prepared to talk to those pieces. So in going through the 4 of them, I don't know, is there someone who wants to put them all up so we can look at them? I wasn't sure who was driving the screens here today.
Yeah, we have Bill Smarzewski from our team. So we have a small slide deck today that recalls what we had previously, as well as a sketch response to the discussion that we've had. So we can work our way through those. And I don't know if you want to, Bill, we just go right to the beginning of this one, right?
Yeah, so Court, what we might be able to do is make this a dialogue through the slides to share the discussion that happened.
Yeah, I think that'll bring us all together, and then we'll simply try to manage the conversations so that we capture what they have done on the design side to bring us any updates or changes or modifications, and then we'll back into where it came from and what questions it answers and what questions we want to wrestle with today.
That sounds good.
Good.
So would you like us to work through a brief overview of the options and what we heard and how we responded to them? Is that what you're asking to do at this point?
Yes, I think that's a good
Okay.
idea to distill what you've heard and then discuss how that relates to these designs. And we're going to give you feedback. One, do we think you heard it correctly? Do we think we communicated it correctly to you? And two, what do we do then with the outcomes of these questions and the assessments that we're making? So yeah, let's take it away.
Okay, so just in general, we've been before you on February 13th, again on March 25th, and then today, April 10th. We want to continue to show you the development of the diagram. So this was what was presented on, this is a summary of the organizational diagrams or the floor plans presented on March 25th. Options 1 through 4 with the names of double bar, pods, treetop teams, and pinwheel. In general, we heard some feedback, we heard it around issues of fidelity of teaming, but then also on April 10th, I believe was that last call, the whole discussion of fidelity of grades was reinforced, not only the teams, but the grades. And so the position of on and off team classrooms became quite important. The other things we heard were really important relative to solar orientation, integration with the topography, and impact onto the existing tree line and characteristics of the site. Bill, you just go to number 2, just as a reminder where we were, the overall forms, and then number 3, the site plan. So, yeah.
Forgive me, with your permission, I want to pause just for a moment. I think this is going to help a few people based on conversations I've had. I want to hear from you, and I want to hear from Lori in regard to just how you, Lori, Justin, and others are defining team. It's a concept we've used without really getting explicit with the definition, and this has come up a couple of times recently. Can we pause just to do that? I think it's critical that we do it now and not have to return to it later.
Sure.
Lori?
Yeah, I'll kick it off and then Justin should fill it in probably. Team is really the cluster of core content areas within the grade. So you're breaking the grade into smaller components, and within each section, so we've been talking about 3 teams per grade. So you divide the grade level into 3, and then each team would have a core content instructor on it, which would be English, math, science, and social studies. And then they become a unit that the student stays centered in for at least those 4 classes. And that allows us to have a much more in-depth view of the whole child, because those teachers are set up to have conversations with each other so they can talk about how Johnny is engaged and performing across all 4 subjects, and they don't just have that individual lens. And then they're integrated back into the larger part of the building for the off team, which you keep hearing us talk about too, the off team classes, which might be a teacher who teaches more than 1 grade and certainly more than 1 cluster of kids.
All right, so population dictates 27 classrooms, approximately 9 per grade. We've got teams that are oriented around core subjects and disciplines. Is there also a classroom number, a number of classrooms that align with what you call team?
Yes, and maybe Keith can show where those classrooms match up with what would equal to the space for a team.
Yeah, so in this diagram, and these 4 diagrams, and we'd like to keep them in comparison to one another rather than digging into one of them in particular. The darker green representation of the 4 classrooms, that is the core representation of the team that Lori just described. So Bill, for instance, if you could just highlight on option 4, a team that is organized around a common meeting space or a hub. So within a particular grade, there are 3 of those teams, and those teams are then supplemented by off-team classrooms, which are shown in the gray color, and by special education support spaces, which is highlighted in the kind of mustard yellow color. The other pieces that you see proximate to within an educational community, we'll call it, is some administrative areas, which is shown in the pink. So in general, if you, so if we're looking at option 4, you can see 3 separate teams. Bill, if you could point to the kind of the core teams, and then also highlight where the relationship of the off-team classrooms are. If you look to moving to the upper right within option 2, the pods, again, the team itself would be the 4 darker green classrooms. Immediately outside of that is the kind of lighter green collaborative space. There are some workshop rooms that face there, and then the off-team classrooms, they're just along that main corridor. They're together with additional support spaces. So that's the organization through each of the options. If you look, let's look at option 3 for a second as well while we're here. This option is very similar to what we saw in the pinwheel. 3 teams fairly proximate to their off-team classrooms and the special education support space. Relative to number 1, slightly different in that the off-team classrooms are within the kind of the common area, not really they're a little more remote from the team itself. So Bill, if you could just highlight those in option 1, where the off-team classrooms are relative to the team. So in those things right there, and generally world language classrooms are there. Is that helpful, Court, in terms of how they're represented and dispersed within the various options, or is there some other question I can answer that helps it become more clear?
3 grades, 9 teams, and 9 teams require 36 classrooms, although we have 27 traditional classrooms called out in the spreadsheets. Am I correct, Lori?
I'm trying to mix and match that in my head without all the documents in front of me.
I would defer to Matt here, but Matt, I think the other 9 classrooms that Court would be referring to would be the science classrooms included within each team. Right?
Correct. Thank you.
That's how you would get to 36.
All right. So
Yeah,
I think
that's correct, Keith.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it really clear to everybody how the terms align with the other terms, because I think it's going to be useful as we dig down deeper now into these designs and which ones seem to favor the approach that the leadership team, Lori's leadership team, is promoting. I'm sure we'll get there pretty soon. Thank you.
So if we could just stay here for a minute, it probably is helpful to highlight the other major components of the program and how they are illustrated. There is a series of art and music classrooms. The music classrooms are rendered in this kind of lighter orange area, and they are immediately adjacent to the cafetorium in each of the options. Bill, if you could just maybe highlight that in option 2 so everybody can see what we're talking about. It's that color there. So you can see the green is the cafetorium and the orange there. The other piece of, there you go, the other specialty classrooms are the art classrooms, and they're just a little bit more pinkish, and they're there. So those are so there's the team, the off-team classrooms, there's art, there's music, And then there's a kind of a technology component. And the technology component, I think, is shown in that more brownish tone right there that Bill is highlighting. That's things like digital literacy and related topics. So hopefully that shows the major organizations of the instructional components, which if I could generally categorize them, they would be the team, the off-team classrooms, and the specialty classrooms. With that, we would be prepared to talk through, maybe we could just go to number 3, slide 3 for a second, Bill. So Court, we're hearing feedback relative to the educational leadership team, and we're hearing feedback from the design subcommittee. Mm-hmm. So we think that the educational leadership team is communicating things to us about the fidelity of teams, how students interact within teams on a given grade, and how they circulate between what might be considered a team classroom, the team hub or common space, and then also both the off-team classrooms or the specialty classrooms. At the same time, we're hearing feedback from the design subcommittee, which is focused on things like ideal solar orientation, how the building sits on and recognizes.
I think we lost you, Keith. But I think he's getting to the good point where we're trying to get some convergence on this.
Yes, we talked a lot about that the other day too. They've been taking all the feedback that, Court, you did a nice job of aggregating it from the design subcommittee. So they've been factoring all those pieces in as well.
Laurie, while we're waiting for Keith, I don't know if we'd be moving too fast to have you.
I can complete the thought that started. So from the design subcommittee, we heard about the solar orientation and the importance of that, the orientation of the building in relationship to the public street, and the relationship of the there's another screen here, it popped up, and the concern that some of the schemes didn't have enough frontality. And also in concern, in particular in 1 or 2 schemes, of to what extent that the scheme was actually extended into the woods. That was the case of scheme number 3. So what we've tried to do is begin to, at least in a couple of the schemes where the solutions were more obvious, try to respond to some of this conversation. We also heard that people really liked the idea of a commons where in one space you can actually view the auditorium, not the auditorium, sorry, the gym, the cafetorium, and the media center. That is sort of kind of public space at the entryway where which allows you to survey the entire sort of public aspect of the project.
Mm-hmm.
So I briefly lost my connection, but I'm back. I apologize for the disruption.
I continued the conversation that you started about the general parameters in terms of the public street, the woods, the solar orientation, and the idea of the sort of commons that binds all larger public spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And Keith, before you pick it back up again, thank you, Saul. Saul, having mentioned auditorium and gymnasium and debates around these being so critical to ultimately what happens here, I'm going to advocate that we make certain we have time to dive into auditorium and gymnasium conversations before we get too deeply into the meeting, because we're going to try to maintain this 90-minute budget for time today. So If we can pick it back up with Keith and then Lori speak to, and Justin, how certain of these options seem to come forward as preferred for teaching and learning, and then we can go to some of the discussions around auditorium, gymnasium, and what could be done to take the considerations that Saul just outlined and bring them back to some or all of these designs.
And then Court, if you would, I think the one other kind of area of influence that we're looking at is the relative data of the building. So those are things like
Yes,
overall efficiency, square footage, enclosure. And so as we're looking at those, we're addressing some of those things simultaneously. So our sketch responses to some of these are influenced by all of those. And so I think maybe it would, we just walk through those a little bit. So Bill, if you could go to slide number 5 for us. And can you pan back just a little bit so we're able to see the whole image? But I guess maybe I just have to, there we go, I just dropped my. So, Court, in our dialogue thus far and in our discussion relative to option number 1, in our discussions with Lori and Justin on last week, and then also our discussions with the design subcommittee, there was a lot of, there wasn't a lot of programmatic or educational adjustment to option 1. One of the things that we did realize as in the generation of the data is because we have these 2 courtyards in the western portion of the northern floor plate. Bill, if you just point to those, that was driving the area of enclosure for this option significantly higher than each of the others, right? And so really what we looked at in here is if there should be a modification to this that would make it more apples to apples, you could potentially look at reorganizing that portion of the plan to remove the courtyards and therefore reduce the amount of surface enclosure and probably get it a little bit closer relative to the overall cost. And you can see that illustrated on the right-hand side under the April 15th piece. I will say that these sketch responses have not been provided to the estimating team. All of their work is based upon the 25th, but we just have a sense that given the increased area of that wall enclosure, that this could be some way that this one might be a little bit more apples to apples in terms of a comparison. Okay. It has a qualitative impact on the project, we would say, but still it is a way that you might be able to bring it more in line with the other options in terms of how much area of envelope you have. Lori or Justin, I don't know if you wanted to make any other comments about the way that option 1 functions from an educational perspective.
Sure. So what we've ended up spending some time on, each of the designs has some really solid team space. We ended up talking more on how conducive that is for grade level connections. And as you can see here, the whole grade level is on the same floor, but in 3 very distinct spaces. So that became a good portion of our talk, that in this option and also in the second option, the spaces are quite distinct from each other, probably not lending to as much grade level wide interaction. And then really the other major discussion was around some of what we've loved about the Peabody arrangement this year, with 6th grade being separate. All of them would have each grade level on a separate floor, You'll see as we get further in, one of them really pulls it off very separately. So that's where we would say on this one that this lends to very distinct team space.
Questions, comments on this one from anybody else on your team, Keith, or from the design subcommittee? All right, maybe press on then.
I would just, sorry, this is Dawn.
Yes, please.
I would just add that the single loaded corridor in the classroom wings has somewhat of an inefficient design, just food for thought. There's a nice quality in that whole corridor on the north side there, you know, overlooks those courtyards and the bridges, and that'll definitely be a nice experience, especially from the project areas or the shared spaces off of each of those teams. I would also say that here the classroom orientation, which Keith alluded to earlier, is as close to ideal as I think we're going to get, with south facing mostly, except for the world language, and that's north facing up in the upper bar. So from an orientation standpoint, this is probably one of my favorites, but the downside is the inefficiency of a single loaded corridor.
I would say also, just a quick comment, that this scheme has the largest travel distances from the classes. Some of the longest travel distances from the classes to the off teams.
Yeah, and thank you. That was Saul, right? Who said that?
Yep.
Yeah, you know, thank you, because, you know, in an earlier meeting, I had asked whether or not there was some sort of program the computer could run in terms of, you know, the normal transition time or passing time for students. And the typical secondary school is about 3 minutes. And it certainly is of great importance to us because of the way the Sanborn building is laid out, and the fact that, you know, our students at Sanborn aren't able to get from one area to the building to another in that 3 minutes. So I think that's a very important part in moving forward in a discussion like this, to make sure we don't recreate something. Because even though, you know, the team is really trying to, you know, make one area of the building kind of a home base for a student, you know, a bell's going to ring and they're still going to have to go to lunch or go to, you know, an off-team class or go to the gym. And we just want to make sure that we're thoughtful about what that transition is going to look like.
Good.
So, Bill, if we just continue to move through the deck, this will show you not only so this was the site plan that we had shown previously with the footprint from March 25th. That footprint has been modified just ever so slightly. You can see that we've taken the courtyards out, and then when you place that over the previous, so you can see that it's fairly quite an innocuous adjustment to the footprint. But notice in the lower right-hand corner, the north arrow. So just to, as Dawn said, this is a you know, strong solar orientation for the entire building. So that sequence of slides shows the responses that we've made to each option. And if you're ready, we could move on through option 2. Option 2, actually, we have not made any adjustments based upon the feedback we've heard or the way that they function. So on the right-hand side, you can see where we were on March 25th. And for today, we have left this one essentially unchanged and intact. Court, is that adequate for this, or would you like a little more discussion of how Lori and Justin see how this one might function? Or
I think we need to hear from them as to how it supports or doesn't support their approach relative to the other 3.
So I'll start that and then Justin can hop in. Again, the team spaces are distinct, as you can see. So that was a large part of our discussion, was that this would not lend itself to grade-wide activity as much. It's a very consolidated plan, so travel time is likely to be improved for sure. We talked quite a bit about the off-team classes, which you now see are in between the teams. I think we've weighed pros and cons of where some of these off-team classes are, particularly world language, which is so close to a core content area for us, that I think we did prefer it having more proximity to the teams, whereas in the first one it was very separate. Justin, do you have anything to add?
No, the first thing you shared is something that, we reflected upon in terms of, when the teams are separated, even though, they may be on the same floor so much, do you miss an opportunity, to build community within a grade? And again, Lori said this earlier, we're really building community in that pivotal year of entry into middle school with our 6th grade. So that's a good example of, we have team goals as a middle school, but we also have grade goals as well. And when the teams are kind of clustered together, it may lend itself to more collaboration and community building. The parent experience with the team is an interesting one. I could certainly, support or help write a dissertation from the teacher perspective or the school perspective of teams. From a parent perspective, there is a small concern that, their child is separated from, their neighbor that they've grown up with and attended the same elementary school. So there is a sense within our community of, okay, we get teaming, we understand the importance of teaming to the educational vision and philosophy, but are there times where, my child is going to be interacting, with their good friend and our neighbor, during the school day? It can be done in off-team times, but not from a community building standpoint.
Thank you, Justin. Keith, was there a reason why you folks didn't look at different orientation on this 3-finger sort of approach?
Bill, if you just back up a little bit, we had made that modification, even if you go back one more where we compare from February. So this was an effort that we made after the February 13th meeting to see if we couldn't adjust the classrooms to have a better solar orientation. Because of the way it occupies the ridge of the site, this was pretty fixed. We tried to improve it, but it's can you go back to the site plan, Bill, that shows this relative to the northern orientation? It's kind of,
by the nature of the scheme, Keith, the long axis of the building versus the short axis of the wings is going to result in one of them getting the wrong solar orientation. Yeah. By definition, the only way to solve that problem is to array all the classrooms in a long corridor, which will make this building exceptionally long, and a very sort of problematic long corridor as the spine of the building. It'll be sort of scheme number 1 on steroids.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I wasn't advocating for it, Saul, so much as simply wanting to hear, for purposes of the meeting and the record, that you took a hard look at it, and this is what can be done with option 2 vis-a-vis orientation. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, option 3.
Sorry, before we jump to that, this is Matt Root. Court, thanks for asking that question about orientation. Can we just dwell on it for a second? I mean, it looks like, you know, the furthest out classroom has still pretty good orientation, right? It's got two sides that are somewhat facing south. It's really those three classrooms that are more interior within the team structure that are more starting to face west, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But there could be, I mean, it could be strategic window placement and exterior shading that could help mitigate those issues a little bit.
Okay.
I guess I have a question on teaming for Lori and Justin. I think at the last call there was mention of how there's some value to, you can go vertical and horizontal with this layout, but that still doesn't really help address the fact that there's not as much community building with this design, right?
Mhm.
Right. In fact, the reason option 5 isn't still in the mix is because it forced that vertical sharing of the team. So the kids had to traverse the stairs to stay on teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the good news is all 4 of these don't, it gives you the option for that if some people after us think that's a better way to do the teams. But
Right.
For us, this puts the whole team on the same floor.
Right. That's the way you would do
Yeah.
you would do it in this scheme. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
So I'd also just like to make sure that everybody understands when we met on April 10th, we reviewed every option from an educational perspective and then looked at the options ability to be manipulated or advanced or revised in some way to address those concerns. And so it's not like we didn't look at number 2 or number 1 and make more aggressive changes. We thought that through the discussion, the possibility for modifications to 3 and 4 were most pronounced. And so you'll see that a much different approach to those. So option 3 is if you just you can see the advancement of the idea from February 13th to March 25th to April 15th. So the big advancement from the 13th to the 25th was to be able to integrate the off-team classrooms in their own little pod almost, so that they're fairly proximate to one of the teams, and then also just to create a little more proximity between the various hubs, we'll call them. As we began to talk to Lori and Justin on last week, it became increasingly apparent that some connectivity between those team spaces to reinforce the sense of a grade were increasingly important. And so you can see what we've done here in addition to rotating the building to an essentially ideal solar orientation, we have also taken the northern team, slid it to the middle of the educational community piece, and then flank it with the off-team classrooms. So now there's a much more interactive location of the various team spaces, and then to get from any given team to any off-team classroom is it's quite dynamic and proximate. The other thing that we did relative to this is we modified the western piece of the building a little bit to remove that courtyard. So now you have greater proximity between the cafeteria, the gymnasium, the media center. We've created kind of a town hall or town square, excuse me, that was strongly present in option 4. We heard lots of positive feedback from that. So we've tried to integrate that into this option.
Mhm.
And we've also, you'll see when we go to, I want to give Lori and Justin an opportunity to talk about that dynamic of the plan, but you can also see this was the previous orientation. Now you can see we've just rotated the building a bit, a much stronger solar orientation, and then it also touches the treed area of the site much more lightly. We're just laying this over the top. What if in fact the site plan was updated, and it will be at the right time, there would be much more of the existing tree cover immediately south of the building. And so so we feel like we've improved the educational community. We've adjusted the solar orientation. We've honored the topography, and we are not so aggressively into the existing tree canopy.
Keith, also, in the previous orientation, the service part of the building was the really primary frontage to the street. So by shifting it in this direction, we actually have much more frontality in relationship to the main entrance. And the service part of the building gets kind of tucked away a little bit more to the side.
Right. So this one, we feel like we've, you know, the sketch response really touches on a lot of the aspects, you know, of the, and it was just kind of ripe for adjustment that addressed multiple issues within this response.
Did we lose a bridge too? Did the previous?
No, it's still here in the central connection.
Well, the central one, but was there a smaller one in the previous design?
No, I think that was scheme number 4.
I think that was number 4. Yeah.
If you go to the floor plan, Bill,
There's not one between. Okay.
No. One of the really wonderful things about this is that you can see that each of the hubs, they're surrounded by their team classrooms, but they also have direct exposure to glazing that gives you views to the north and to the south. And what that does, not only does it introduce natural daylighting into those hub areas, but it almost expands and captures the circulation corridor, you know, for greater utility during teaching times. You know, while people are going back and forth between classrooms, you know, that will function like a corridor. But while you're teaching, it almost just naturally expands the educational utility of those spaces and provides natural daylighting to it. We've pulled the building apart just a little bit to allow that to happen. But the other thing is that it kind of, we use the word ravine. It's a little bit probably exaggerated for the kind of the topography, but there is a natural cleft in the site right there. And that's where this bridge is over. And so the building is still located in relationship to that in a smart way.
So I'm impressed. I've got a question or two, but I'd like to turn it over to Lori and Justin first, and then other committee members. What questions do we have? How does this optimize, if it does, the plans for teaching and learning, for community building, for team integrity, as well as grade integrity, if we could look at that. And then, of course, some of the aspects around likely efficiencies and economies around design and cost. Justin and Lori?
Sure. So this one intrigues me because when it was in its original state back in February, it was the longest linear one. And I think we had so many concerns about travel time that we couldn't really consider it. And now it's morphed in a way to have a lot of additional benefits. So it's really been interesting to watch this one progress. I think you can see for itself the difference with the teams not being so segregated from each other. We just feel that that's going to do a real bring a real advantage to the grade levels. and to the ability for, say, a social studies teacher at each team to then the three of them partnering to say, let's all do this. And then you've got this really fantastic common space that just flows into the hallway, for lack of a better word, and can be this really dynamic, open floor for the grade at that point, I think. The benefits that we started to see in last week's sort of review of this was not only did it do the team and the grade level community identity, but when you get the town hall feel that Saul just described with the common spaces, I feel like you start to get a school identity in the other part of the building. And that was really appealing, I think, as well. And then the other bonus for me that we really didn't target, but it's here, is you'll remember in some of the early discussions and documents talking about the library being a real core of the building. And that evolves through this design, because the red arrow is the main entrance. And then there's the library, right? Heart and soul of the whole school. And the bridge there has widened at our request, because we don't want kids backlogging in that. And I think you just end up with this really amazing transition space, which is not always easy to do with transition space. So there's definitely some benefits to this that have evolved over the course of the revisions. Do you have anything to add, Justin?
No, I think you've captured it pretty well. You know, I think this has at the forefront building grade community and building team community. And a part of that grade community, you know, I mentioned the culture and the climate of a particular grade, but also the interdisciplinary piece that you touched on very well.
Comments, questions from committee?
Bill, if you could just go back to the site plan just one more time. I think the other thing, this site plan, when we showed it on March 25th, it was the one that showed the parking against the street and the kind of complete interconnectivity of the athletic and recreational outdoor spaces. You know, if you could imagine how the vehicular circulation gets adjusted to the building orientation, I think it only reinforces that. And I think it has a very strong site potential as well. So. Now, option number 4 also was ripe with modification opportunities. And so if you see again, the same pattern from the February 13th, no, go back, February 13th to March 25th to April 15th. What we heard is that initially this option had tremendous kind of potential for that grade fidelity that we're talking about. And it was the kind of unit, the grade level unit that you see on February 13th that we actually imported into option 3 for April 15th because of the proximity of not only the teams, but the proximate off-team classrooms. At February 13th, there was fairly significant concern that with the 3 one-story pods, it was taking up a lot of the available topography. So on March 25th, we took the eastern classroom community and we stacked it on the west one. It had a very, there's great interactivity between the teams and their off-team classrooms, but it's also very proximate to the town hall component of the building. So the travel distance for a student to go to art or music or the library is relatively short compared to the others. The Achilles heel of this one was a concern over the solar orientation of the classroom blocks. You could almost argue that 50% of them had east-west orientation rather than north-south. So one of the things that we worked pretty hard on over the last few weeks and in discussion with Justin and Lori is if you could rotate and modify that slightly so that none of the aspects, the town hall or the educational communities, pay a penalty for solar orientation. So that has required the kind of the town hall to be rearranged a little bit, but also this was, I don't want to say fortuitous because like we worked on it, but now like when you come into that main hall, you have visibility all the way through. And so there's tremendous visual connectivity to this central courtyard from that main area. So it's easy to enter. You find the cafeteria, you find the gym, you find the media center. You have this wonderful sense of natural daylighting adjacent to the courtyard. The educational communities retain their kind of compactness, and then they're arrayed in such a way that, again, the travel distance are relatively short. Bill, if you just go to the next one. So this was the previous orientation, and the criticism of it was valid, right? When you look at it relative to solar orientation, with our footprint modifications and our rotation, you can see it's in a much more favorable position. And then when you look at it relative to where it was, if we go to the next one, you can now see that it still retains the kind of essential qualities that we had, but also addresses some of the significant, the weaknesses that were in it. One of the things that kind of rose to the top in our discussions with Lori and Justin was the possibility of a sixth grade academy, that not only would the sixth grade have some grade fidelity, but they might even be slightly set apart from 7 and 8. And this one offers that possibility the most strongly, I would suggest.
Or I might just add to that so it's clear why that is. On this diagram, the colored team space that's green and shows all the color is a 2-story spot that could house 7 and 8. The black lined, thank you, footprint is a 1-story into the hill, essentially, I think, that could be grade 6 to house the teams there. So that's obviously intriguing to us, given our experience with the Peabody building being so separate. A lot of the other positives we saw here are similar to the third option. The sightline is great, obviously, but the rest of it with the town hall for the school culture and then the team and grade levels, I think works quite nicely.
One of the interesting things as we rotated this configuration and started looking at sort of the site relationship is that it started becoming a combination of the better qualities of Scheme 1. One of the things that people liked in Scheme 1 is a series of the courtyards that sort of can be used as teaching space or an intermediary space somewhere between the woods and the more open spaces of the front of the building. So you have these intimate spaces. And now what's nice about this is that these intimate spaces sort of array almost in a linear cascading pattern. On the left side, you have the one for the cafeteria. In the middle, you have a central area that would have an up and a lower area for the art classes. And again, it opens up on the right side to the landscape. So it's kind of the scheme became a sort of a modified version of both the pinwheel and number 1.
So I'll display my ignorance here. With this design, we get the separate nature of a 6th grade academy, physically separate. What's the cost to add to a design like that as opposed to stacking that east 6th grade into a 3-story configuration in the southwest instead? Does that make sense? I mean, what I'm seeing here, correct me if I'm wrong, is we're basically peeling off a 3rd story and putting it into a separate wing. If we were to compare it with the other designs. Correct?
I think that I think there's probably a cost. I'm not so sure the differential. There is a cost. Probably it would be more cost effective. I would say that the scheme was developed as a sort of as a configuration that relates the building to the landscape more so. And at the heart of it is that I think that if we were going to have a simple dumbbell scheme where you have common spaces and then a stacked tower, it would probably be a different kind of approach to the building and the site.
Yeah, I'm not advocating here. I'm simply trying to get a sense of how it distinguishes this design from a cost perspective relative to the other ones, simply because I don't know. And, you know, I know it's only early speculation on this, and it may not even be a meaningful question, Saul, if the cost differential wouldn't be dramatic.
I don't think this fall, Keith, this falls in the middle of the group, right?
We'll have to see where it falls. Yeah, we've had some initial discussions. Initially, it's appeared that that was the case, but there were a series of puts and takes in a reconciliation discussion. So I don't know where it all falls out.
Okay.
So Court, we're going to have all those estimates by next week's meeting. So
Yeah.
you'll be able to see directly if what you're predicting is correct or not.
Well, again, not a prediction. It's just an uninformed question for the experts. Yeah. Okay. And Justin and Laurie, do you want to tell us any more about how strongly you'd advocate for a separate sixth?
Well, I mean, we don't have enough information to say
Okay.
if all other things, I mean, to your point, if it's a gross cost factor, we're going to acknowledge that's not logical. If it's close, I think we would strongly want to consider it. But there's a lot of other variables to still talk through. So
Yeah.
we definitely have sort of been stuck on this since we spotted it last week, that this has a lot of positives. But I think you heard positives in the other designs as well.
Okay.
So
other comments? I'm mindful of our time. We're looking at 30 minutes and want to do as much as we can. Want to make sure we get to gym and auditorium discussions. We are not going to dive into sustainability. That's not our domain, although it'll enter our discussions at some point, and it does by virtue of orientation talk here, but only that far. Questions, comments about these four designs?
Court, I'd just like to make one final comment here. Bill, if you could go back to our data summary. This is not a formal presentation of cost. What it is simply our being aware of the fact that floor area, roof area, and wall area drive costs. So we are conscious of these adjustments. I will tell you that the line at the top, the gross floor area, where you see modest adjustments upward from the target of 144,005, we can meet that number on any scheme, any option. But what you can see is that the adjustments that we're showing are relatively positive. They tighten the footprint, they tighten the wall area, so we think that these are in the spirit of the cost model for the previous, what we've previously shown you. And we're thinking that we are honoring the area of the building and not significantly adding to the overall cost of the building. If anything, we're maybe tightening it up a little bit, but it's just, again, not a cost presentation, but simply a statement that we are tracking the things that contribute to cost, and we are cognizant of controlling those as we adjust the options.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for this. Turn it to Dawn, to Charlie, to Chris, to Matt. Be sure we understand these and put any questions forward that we want to send to the design team at this point. I think this reflects nicely what the design subcommittee heard as an outcome of leadership team consideration of these 4 designs that they brought to the design team. For purposes of anybody listening to this recording, we're distinguishing design subcommittee, which is part of the building committee, from the design team led by SMMA and Ewing Cole. Hearing any comments, questions?
I have sorry, this is Dawn, and I did have a quick work phone call I had to take, so I apologize. Could you go back to the site plan for option 4 for just 1 second? I appreciate that you're able to get the wings to be sort of south and north facing. Okay. And the one to the east is the single story, and the one to the west is the 2-story still, correct?
Yes, and the eastern one steps down, follows the contours of the site generally.
So is that one in line with the lower level on the west?
No, it's below, it's in line with, there's a small art classroom portion at the lower level of the northern public hub, building, and this is 15 feet down.
So you have to go downstairs from that central hub on the north to get to that wing.
Yes, here it's an open stair opportunity to, it's but yes, you go down and then come across it. It's very similar to what was in the last time we showed this.
Do you have a lower level floor plan? Below, so this is ground floor. I'm sorry to make you go back over this if you went over it already.
No, it's okay. Bill, do we have one in this deck? Is that something you can pull up, or?
Not in the deck, but we have one.
We do have it. I don't think we put it in here, but we could.
Yeah, we looked at it last week.
Well, one of the, Don, the other thing about it, that's by the class, with the classrooms on the lower level, they can have exterior workspace, which is kind of nice, in the lower courtyard.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lower level of the western wing as well, right?
No, there's the western wing has an upper level.
Okay, so we have 3 different floor levels, none of which have 2 teams on them. Or 2
Right.
grades.
Two grades. Yes, in this option, that's right.
Okay, so everyone understands that, right? So call it a lower level, which is a level below the floor that you enter into. And that's on the east. There's nothing on the ground floor, which is the front door level on the east, but the west has 1 story, and then you go up that one to get to the next grade.
Yeah. And the thought was that the roof of east would be a roof garden and a play area that's accessible from the main floor, which would be really wonderful because it'll be like play area surrounded with trees.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my mind, I don't see how that's more beneficial than just having ground floor site availability. I don't know, others could argue with me. It's not like we're in an urban site or anything. Like in an urban site, I'd completely be like, oh my God, yeah, great idea. I don't know, here, that for me, and that's a personal opinion, not, something, but I could see parents being concerned about that.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course that's a concern, but there's quite a few fantastic projects being built where there's obviously different phenomenological qualities to being in a roof garden overlooking trees, almost like balconies or cascade replicating terraces in classical gardens. I think that's a kind of a phenomenological kind of situation, and I think they probably can get quite a bit of funding for something like this, not necessarily from direct township projects.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just when I
Um,
talked with him, I'll interrupt Saul because that's coming from me. If this were to be the choice, which I'm not saying it would be my first choice necessarily, I think there's pros to this one and three. We've been well supported in other projects for those kinds of projects on the grounds around the schools, but that's a big hypothetical.
But we also there's a lot of funding out there for roof gardens from independent trusts and other places. And one of the hospitals that we worked on actually tapped into that.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe it's just my logistic mind working today. Like, you know, that decreases the availability of roof area for photovoltaics. It also means longer runs for mechanical systems because you're not coming directly down. You'd in theory have to put them on the central bar and then from a distribution standpoint, carry them through that bridge or through that corridor connection and down a level. So just, and again, I don't know. I'm not saying I don't like this option. I'm just thinking about the pros and cons.
This is Charlie, right? You know, I got dropped off several times because of some issues here with my desktop, but you know, I continue to have concern. The last, again, I would agree that it seems to be, it's great that it's been resurrected and it's been looked at some creative ways. You know, it just worries me. We're getting a little bit complex here with distribution and shapes, and you know, to Dawn's point, funds. And the more distributed you are, the harder it is to, you know, put it all together from a. It would seem to me from a heating, utilities, cooling, and so forth. You've got I also agree with the comment about the rooftop. I'm not sure. Again, we have 30 acres or 25 acres. I'm not sure how much land we have, but why we would need to do something, you know, beyond what we have with the property on top of the roof. And then the PV issue. I also had a question about shading. Is that roof shaded at all, or any of those roofs shaded by, you know, being so tucked away? Are there any issues there? I guess I would throw that out as a question.
I put that question to Dawn, I believe, a few days ago, and Dawn, your feeling was wouldn't be too significant. Did I hear it correctly?
What wouldn't be? Shading?
Shading.
As far as
Well,
The roofs.
that it would have pros and cons, and so it wasn't going to be a big factor.
oh, as far as being in the treetop, is that the question you asked me about being in the treetop?
Is there any shading that's going to be an impediment to the photovoltaics?
It's definitely, well, it's down the hill, right? So in theory, it's below the tree top. So I guess I don't know enough about those trees to know. I assume they're in the spring and summer, they're full, and in the winter, they lose their leaves.
It looked a little potentially problematic to me. I got to get that sorted out. That's one factor that ought to be looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we're going to have data on the you know, the effect on heat load from being distributed like this. Maybe there isn't much of an effect. I don't know, but it would seem that it would be, you know, it's going to be basically, you know, a little bit more burdensome. And maybe SMMA can comment on that.
And that can be now or later, but let's note it for certainly if we're not going to get a response now.
What are the, quick question, thank you for bringing up the lower level. This is at down a level from the entry finished floor, the entry level. So are you having to fill that whole east side? Are those 1 or 2 foot increments? What are the on that?
The topography, the topography is not correct on that drawing, but this is very rough.
Okay, so
The answer is we don't know yet.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be
Okay.
terraced down, similar to what we showed on the
All right.
previous meeting.
Mhm.
If there's no objection, and please object if it's helpful to do so. I want to watch our time and ask this question of the design team and the design subcommittee. Design subcommittee, do we want to press the design team to bring these now modified concepts to the estimators, because they're still in the early stage of their work? And design team, is that the right thing to do right now?
Sorry, I must clarify on that, Court. We're actually all complete with the estimates. That the meeting that we had last, the SBC meeting, was to kick off that with the 4. So the estimates drafts are under review right
Okay.
now. So we wouldn't be adding these
Okay.
in.
So that train left the station. I just wanted to be clear about that. Okay. All right. Fine. So I'll put it to the design subcommittee. Can we use our time to greatest effect to put forward the questions that are going to be critical and better sooner than later about auditorium and gymnasium? What do you think? We have in there in the present configuration a 6,000 foot gym. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
And the question that is going to continue around this community is, do we go to 86 or even above? Is there anything we can bring into this deliberation today that's helpful? And I would put a second question there, which is, we have a cafetorium with a plus 1,600 feet for purposes of a stage that would go away were there to be a black box or an Alcott style auditorium for one classroom, or a 725 for one grade, or a 725 seat for 2 grades, if memory serves me correctly on all of this. We're going to have to wrestle with these questions. Can we make any progress today on it?
So
go ahead.
Just, this is Phil, just for a little bit of clarification, the performance area, if in the cafetorium, would be what we refer to as a platform, not a stage. So it doesn't have operable curtains, and it's far more modest in its configuration. So you have 3 very different performance type spaces. You've got a platform in the cafetorium. The other options are the distinct spaces, a black box theater, and the third as a conventional theater auditorium of multiple sizes.
Okay. So Lori and Justin, knowing that we've got fiscal constraints that are unknown but real, is a 1 grade level auditorium aspirational, or is it something beyond that?
Well, I'll start, I guess. You know, when we made the shift to the cafetorium, we understood that we were trading the ability for what Phil just described as really that stage environment. I think we would make use educationally of any size that gets put back if it does. We're okay if it doesn't, but if it does, I'm sure we would benefit. I think we had some discussion, and I'm probably jumping to the money part a little bit, that, you know, I think to build it for 700 and it's used more occasionally might be a cost effectiveness discussion. So I think if it can house one grade, we know we can make often use of that, frequent use of that. To put the whole school in, Justin, I know, would fill it as often as, if he had it, he will, if you build it, he will put them in there, but I think we got to weigh cost against frequency in that case.
In order to put some pressure on Lori for this, I independently and informally spelled out a few ideas about or questions about space in the current plans. By way of asking, can she and her team continue to squeeze out any space that's allocated for certain uses in the present plan as trade-off for another 4,000 square feet for purposes of auditorium? So I wasn't advocating. I was rather simply saying, if you look really critically, are there any trade-offs left for you in order to get an auditorium and protect the core educational mission, Lori? And I know that's a big question. And
yeah, I guess I'd have to answer it based on all the work up till now without going back one more time. If we felt that we could trade off the core pieces to get to that, I think we would have done that before we proposed the cafetorium. It kind of worked the other way around, where we could feel we were going to give up core spaces if we didn't go that way. So I think based on the work we've done so far, I don't think so.
First, you know, we've, probably a bad idea to try to pick out areas where there was some potential. We've never really had a discussion of, as a committee, and that I'm aware of, as to whether or not, you know, having an auditorium made sense or not. It seems to be basically dropping by the wayside because the 144,000 square feet, you know, is allocated somewhere else. And I certainly understand, you know, why that is. But at the same time, you know, it's, in many cases, the space does exceed the, you know, the spaces in the previous school. And, you know, it would seem that it would be a good exercise to take another look and let the committee, you know, see what some of those trade-offs might be. I'm sure that you have done a lot of work on this. We weren't necessarily a part of it, and that's okay. I think given that we're going to knock out something that all the other schools have because we've used up that allocation, it would seem to me that it would be okay to, you know, for the committee to take a look at what the choices would be. For example, the servery. You've got a bunch of square feet. I don't know whether it's 1,200 square feet for a servery. And, you know, boom, boom, boom. There are several items that are like that, you know, we might want to have a discussion about before we kind of wrap this space piece up. At least that, you know, what I would favor doing. I can't see my notes because I lost my screen. But that's, you know, a process that I think we might find fruitful. Now, I certainly are getting input on the need for auditorium from the community. So I'd take a second pass at it. That's all I'm saying.
Other comments from the design team? We're hearing a suggestion that we see that this discussion and debate continue around auditorium, not constrained by the 144 and the cost we're guessing might be associated with 144. that we could extend that conversation at least until we know more about cost. And to Charlie's point, what trade-offs might look like and how painful they would be before we discard the idea.
Court, I know you shared a list of other questions that we haven't spoken to, and I think it might be a little challenging in this Zoom environment. But we're happy to, on the list of questions you sent, there wasn't one space reference there that hadn't been through a vetting process, and most of them had already been reduced. We're happy to share the thinking behind anything people are, looking for. It's just a matter of figuring out the right forum and process to do that. So.
I think you already did make a bunch of cuts, and that's horrible. So I don't think anybody would take that away. What might be profitable around and see, what that looks like. It might be ruled to do around and what are the lower spaces and considered to be traded off, rather than just saying we've made up our mind, it's done.
Charlie,
Well, I think we're just asked to do it from the educational side, so that from our side, we put the priorities out. I think you're right. The committee's got to vet the rest and hear the educational priorities and then vet it against what the other things are.
Yeah, and when Lori refers to the ideas that I shared with her, I wanted to be faithful to open meeting and just have a set of questions going to her as the superintendent by way of not making her redo her work, but rather just to, if you will, scrub and scrutinize this question as carefully as we can, because it's a big give to relinquish the auditorium if indeed we have to. So I would propose that we're not there yet because we don't have the estimates in yet, and the estimates don't even align perfectly with now the updated designs. So there might be some hope remaining that we've got room within the hoped for gross square footage and the hoped for budget ceiling that the town might entertain. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it may be helpful to have at least some sketch plans for 3A and 4A that roughly depict the various options for gymnasium spaces and for auditorium, just to have a rough visual as we further talk about how those might be incorporated. At least it would be helpful for me. I look at 3A and 4A, and I think those are based on the smallest sizes rather than the 2 or 3 other larger sizes.
Yeah, Chris, that's my question too, of kind of for each of these options, does one lend itself or not lend itself better or worse towards the expansion upon the gym or the auditorium? Is it easier to do in one option versus another?
Agree.
Okay. So other members of the design subcommittee, we have a mind that there's a general consensus. We'd like to extend this conversation with design team as well as with the instructional leadership team. Mindful that we don't want Lori to redo, but rather to help inform us if indeed we are forced to forego any of these intermediate level recommendations for auditorium space and gym space. Is that acceptable to the design subcommittee that we ask folks to keep this on the table?
Yep.
And I'm just remembering the original doc drawings had the auditorium on them. So I imagine that's been in their mindset all along, that we may ask to have it show back up again.
All right. I'm going to ask that we check in with each design subcommittee member and then with the design team to do any necessary clarification of anything we've covered today, any summation that we need to hear, any parking lot items to make sure we don't forget for future deliberation before we wind this down for the day. Dawn? And
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm waiting for costs to come out so I can better understand differentiators between the different design options. But I think I've heard clearly from the educators and the educational team what their preference is. And I think, you know, finding any efficiencies we can in the plan at this point would be great. And then as far as the gym and auditorium, we've heard loud and clear what the community, or at least the people who are comfortable reaching out to us, what their preferences are. But again, it may come down to money. So
yeah,
waiting to hear more.
thank you. Okay. And Chris Popov, we good?
We're good, Court, thanks.
Okay. And Matt, are you still with us?
I am. I'm still here. I just have a quick one. I know we didn't get to it, but I saw on the framework for the costing there's a detailed layout of the mechanical systems, and I guess I'm wondering how much costing info we're going to receive on mechanicals. It in my mind it seems a little premature to get to the details of mechanical system costing already, and I guess I'd like to have a little more public discussion about the mechanicals and baselines and expectations and what the town is willing to accept and not accept before we start seeing these really early conceptual kind of mechanical system costs.
All right. And what would constitute next steps to see that happens, Matt?
Thanks for the follow-up, Court. I guess maybe just some time in a future meeting to discuss what the various options are that are under consideration. I mean, I don't know we can spend a while talking about mechanical systems, but I guess I don't want a lot of time and effort being put into analyzing options that aren't in line with the committee's kind of
Good. Okay.
thinking.
Kristen, you comfortable with that?
Yeah, it's we'll be talking a lot about what informed the estimates and what assumptions were made in our upcoming meeting on next week Thursday.
Okay.
So I think that'll help shed a lot of light on that.
Good.
Are you locked in on those 3 columns that you're looking at now, or do we have an opportunity to impact the content of those 3 columns before the estimation's done?
The 3 columns, could you clarify?
Well, you've got baseline, the ones that are in your mail, the baseline, option 1 and option 2. I think that's the way it was
No,
titled, option 1, option 2.
Yeah, they've continued to evolve, and we're just really trying to get as much information as possible. And to Matt's point, it is extremely early and very preliminary, and sizing or designing is definitely not something that happens in detail right now. But we understand that it's important for the community to get preliminary information, and so we're working to do just that. So the final system selection and design and all of that will be informed by many meetings with our mechanical engineer and so on at a later time. So it's right now the information that we're gathering is really just to inform energy models and to inform costs, and it's very preliminary.
Okay.
But by no means does it lock you into a specific system, because we expect to evaluate those in detail later.
It's just, Kristen, this is Dawn. It's fair to say it's a cost per square foot at this point for a system, right?
Right. Yeah.
The information you're going to get
Yep.
as far as cost. So
Right. Right.
Yeah, I guess, Kristen, so my question would be like, what's the value that is adding at this point? I mean, we're not making decisions on mechanical systems. So we're making decisions on the three architectural options here. I guess I just worry that we might get bogged down in mechanical system costs, and certainly, as you say, we anticipate a lot of discussion about it. I worry that it's a. I think you're on mute, Don. But I worry that it's a quagmire that we don't need to get into yet.
Right, and the primary driver behind looking at system types at a high level right now is really to do with being able to give you a cost benefit analysis of code building versus a enhanced sustainability kind of look, because that would be a different system, an all electric system versus a gas boiler. So it's really just that high level for to discuss payback periods and things. So it's correct. We are not looking at evaluating systems. It's more holistic.
I'm going to interrupt and say, I think we're looking at Phil's email screen. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know we gotta end the meeting. I guess my concern there, Kristen, is I think like on the boiler, right? So would the town be comfortable with a gas boiler, which is in the baseline right now? And no, I have opinions about that. I'm sure others do as well. So I worry that we're getting tied to assumptions that the committee hasn't fully discussed.
Good. I think that's an important note. And I think the minutes will reflect it too, and we're going to carry that forward, Matt. Thank you. And I think we know the answer to your hypothetical question. All right. Design subcommittee, Charlie, are we in good shape to wind this up? Lori?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Design team, Kristen, are you content that we can put a wrap on this for today and we'll pick it up again next week?
Yes, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. I want to thank Chris for hosting the meeting, and I want to thank Minuteman Media for carrying it. I want to thank community members for joining us today. Most of all, I want to thank all the participants in the meeting. 90 minutes here represents many, many, many hours of work that brought us to April 15th, and we are deep into it with a lot more work in front of us next week, but I think we've made some progress today. I'll get the minutes out for your consideration in draft form as soon as I can. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
And that came from Chris. Good, thank you. And a second?
Second from Matt Root.
And from Matt. And those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much, all. I appreciate it. Take good care. Take very good care, please.
Thank
you, Court.